The day my mentor erased me, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse me directly. He didn't even say my name. He stood at a Pentagon podium under bright lights and called it a lapse in judgment. That was it. 17 years of service reduced to one carefully chosen phrase. If you've ever been blamed to protect someone more powerful than you, you already know how that feels. Before I tell you how it happened, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to choose between protecting your people and protecting your career, hit like and subscribe. Because what happened next changed everything. I was 22 when I stepped onto the grounds of the United States Air Force Academy with a scholarship letter folded inside my jacket. I grew up in a farming town outside Pueblo, Colorado, where ambition usually meant owning more land than your neighbor. My high school counselor suggested nursing school. My physics teacher, a retired Air Force captain, handed me an application and said, "You're built for something bigger." I didn't believe him, but I applied anyway. My father drove me to the academy in his rusted pickup. He had served in Vietnam as infantry and came home with shrapnel in his leg and a permanent distrust of brass. When I told him I wanted to fly, he stared at me for a long time and said, "Officers don't bleed the way enlisted do." I said nothing. He drove me anyway. That was his version of support. The academy broke a lot of people. It didn't break me, but it nearly reshaped me into something brittle. I wasn't the loud cadet. I wasn't the natural leader. I survived on discipline and caffeine. While others bonded at football games, I memorized aircraft systems until 2 in the morning. I wasn't trying to be extraordinary. I was trying not to fail. There's a difference. Fear builds endurance, but it doesn't build confidence. Pilot training at Columbus Air Force Base came next. That's where I first felt the sky answer back. My instructor climbed out before my first solo flight and tapped the fuselage twice. "Don't overthink it, Lawson." I did anyway. But when the wheels left the runway and the aircraft responded to my hands alone, something shifted. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere that didn't require permission. That's where I met Colonel Thomas Caldwell. He ran advanced tactical airlift training and carried authority like a tailored suit. Gray at the temples, steady voice, decorated record. He watched my landings for a week before saying anything. Then one afternoon he pulled me aside. "You fly like you're afraid to make a mistake." I said, "Sir, I am." He smiled faintly. "Mistakes teach. Hesitation kills." That line stayed with me. He placed me on the tactical airlift track. Not glamorous fighter jets. Not headline missions. Cargo into unstable regions. Evacuations. Humanitarian corridors. The kind of flying that saves lives quietly. I deployed within 18 months. Earthquake relief in Central America. Dust-choked runways in North Africa. Extraction flights in areas that didn't officially exist on maps. I learned to calculate fuel margins in my head. I learned to read storm systems by smell and shadow. I learned to keep my voice calm when ground fire flickered too close to the runway lights. Caldwell checked in often. A message after a rough landing. A recommendation that placed me in a special operations logistics unit known as Task Wing Echo. He never made it sentimental. He invested in competence, not affection. When I made captain, he sent a single note: "You're not lucky. You're prepared." I kept that note in my desk for years. The call sign came during a mission off the Horn of Africa. Intelligence had shifted midair. A medical extraction team was pinned down. Weather was collapsing. Command advised abort. I assessed wind shear, fuel, terrain. I chose to continue. We landed under crosswinds that should have pushed us off the strip. We lifted out overloaded but alive. Back at base, Caldwell walked into the debrief at 0300. "That was reckless," he said first. My stomach dropped. Then he added, "And exactly right." 2 days later, my crew painted the words Iron Phoenix near the cargo door. I'd risen from a decision that could have burned me. I wore that call sign like armor. By 33, I was a major with 14 deployments. I missed my sister's wedding. I missed Christmas dinners. I missed the slow rhythm of civilian life. I told myself it was service. That sacrifice meant something. Caldwell made brigadier general when I was 36. At his promotion ceremony he thanked his family, his command staff, and the brave operators under him. He didn't mention me specifically. I told myself that was maturity, not distance. Then things changed. After his promotion to the Pentagon, communication shifted through a liaison officer instead of direct calls. Mission approvals slowed. Commendations disappeared into administrative reviews. My name quietly vanished from after-action summaries I had written. Nothing dramatic. Just a slow dilution of presence. I assumed it was bureaucracy. I was wrong. The crack became visible during a filmed visit to our hangar at Ramstein. Cameras followed Caldwell as he toured aircraft and shook hands. My crew and I were prepping a C-17 for a classified logistics run into East Africa. Hydraulic fluid on our sleeves. Checklist in hand. He approached, smiled for the lens. "This is one of our experienced transport commanders," he said. "Not Iron Phoenix. Not Rebecca. Just one of many." I felt something cold settle in my chest. In that moment I understood something I hadn't before. I had become useful background. That night, I reviewed mission logs from the past 3 years. I noticed patterns. Attribution shifting upward. Briefings reassigned. Language reframed. It wasn't accidental. It was narrative management. And I was no longer central to the story. 3 months later, the South Sudan mission crossed my desk. Humanitarian delivery. Classified as low risk. The timeline was aggressive. Intelligence marked, confirmed, far too quickly. Something felt off, but it carried command approval. Including Caldwell's digital authorization. We launched at 0900. The sky was clear. The crew was solid. I had flown with them for years. At 1300, UN peacekeepers radioed that militia vehicles were moving toward the camp. I requested confirmation. Command responded, "Proceed." Intelligence verified. I saw dust plumes through the cockpit glass. I saw vehicles accelerating. I saw muzzle flashes before we even completed half the offload. I made the call to abort. We lifted off under small arms fire. One loadmaster took shrapnel. The aircraft sustained damage but remained operational. Half the supplies remained on board. Every member of my crew came home alive. 24 hours later, I was ordered to Washington. 3 days after that, my mentor stood behind a podium and called it a lapse in judgment. And that was just the beginning. The Pentagon looks smaller on television. In person, it feels like a machine. Endless corridors, polished floors, fluorescent lighting that never quite lets you forget where you are. When I walked into the building that morning in my dress blues, I already knew the outcome had been decided. The meeting wasn't about facts. It was about containment. General Thomas Caldwell was seated at the head of the conference table when I entered. He didn't look at me at first. His liaison officer sat to his right. Two senior officers I didn't recognize sat to his left. A public affairs representative stood against the wall, quiet, observant. I stood at attention and waited. Lieutenant Colonel Lawson, Caldwell said finally. Not Rebecca. Not Phoenix. Just rank and last name. Walk us through the South Sudan mission. I did. I kept my voice steady. Timeline. UN warning. Intelligence confirmation. Visual contact with hostile vehicles. Estimated distance. Rate of approach. Decision to abort. I spoke in facts, not emotion. When I finished, he folded his hands. You deviated from direct orders. I made a tactical decision based on evolving ground conditions that posed immediate danger to my crew and aircraft, I replied. The intelligence was confirmed, he said calmly. With respect, sir, it was wrong. The room tightened. His liaison leaned forward. Field reports are often incomplete. Command had broader intelligence sources. I had visual confirmation of armed vehicles within 1 kilometer of an unsecured landing zone, I said. My crew was exposed. My ramp was down. That wasn't incomplete information. That was imminent threat. Caldwell's face didn't change. That was the part that hurt the most. No anger. No visible betrayal. Just strategy. We are conducting a review, he said. Pending the outcome, you are being reassigned stateside. Administrative post at Andrews. Your crew will be redistributed. There it was. Clean. Surgical. Career-neutral language that meant operational exile. I saluted. I left. I made it to the restroom down the hall before my hands started shaking. Not from fear. From understanding. The review wasn't about determining what happened. It was about shaping how it would be remembered. 3 days later, I watched the press briefing from a temporary apartment near Andrews Air Force Base. Caldwell stood under bright lights. American flag behind him. Calm voice. Measured tone. Due to an unnamed field officer's lapse in judgment, critical humanitarian supplies were delayed. We are reviewing protocols to ensure this does not happen again. Unnamed. He didn't need to say Rebecca Lawson. Everyone who mattered knew. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not rage. Not even heartbreak. Clarity. I wasn't being punished for a mistake. I was being sacrificed for optics. The transfer to Andrews was quiet and efficient. My new office was a windowless cube in strategic operations analysis. The kind of unit where experience goes to age politely. I wrote reports that would be summarized by someone else. I attended meetings where my operational background made people uncomfortable. The first week, I tried to stay invisible. The second week, Colonel Daniel Tanaka called me into his office. He had an intelligence background. Direct. Efficient. Not easily impressed. I read your full file, he said without preamble. Not the public version. I didn't respond. You saved your crew. Yes, sir. And now you're here because someone above you needed the narrative cleaner than the truth. That was the first time anyone had said it out loud. He slid a thick folder across his desk. We're reviewing humanitarian airlift protocols. High-risk theaters. Intelligence verification failures. I want real analysis. Not something that flatters command. When do you need it? I asked. 3 weeks. I'll have it in 2. That assignment became my lifeline. I worked 12-hour days pulling mission logs from the past 5 years. I traced patterns. Compressed timelines correlated with higher risk exposure. Intelligence confirmations marked verified without multi-source authentication. Communication lags during encrypted relay transitions. The South Sudan scenario wasn't an anomaly. It was predictable. When I submitted the report, Tanaka read it in one sitting. "This is going to make senior leadership uncomfortable," he said. "It's accurate. They may call it biased. The data speaks for itself." He studied me for a long moment. "The Oversight Committee is conducting a parallel review. They might want you to testify." The word hung there. Testify meant putting my name, my credibility, and whatever was left of my career on record. "If they ask," I said, "I'll testify." 2 weeks later, Major Rafael Ortiz called from Germany. He'd been my co-pilot on the South Sudan mission. "Ma'am, we heard you're testifying. You need to stay out of this, Raf. We're submitting statements," he said. "All of us. Cho. The loadmasters. Everyone. That will hurt your careers." "Maybe," he replied. "But silence hurts more." I stared at the phone after he hung up. Loyalty wasn't dead. It just didn't live at the top. The Oversight Committee hearing took place in a secure room inside the Pentagon. 5 generals. Court reporter. Recording devices. Controlled air. "Lieutenant Colonel Lawson," the chairwoman began, "walk us through your decision-making process." I did. Again. Timeline. Intelligence discrepancy. Visual confirmation. Tactical threat. I presented communications logs showing my second request for clarification at 1,318 hours. No response. "Are you alleging deliberate silence from command?" one general asked. "I am stating there was no response during a critical escalation window," I replied. "Whether that was technical failure or deliberate disregard is beyond my access level." They pressed on loyalty. "You worked under General Caldwell for 7 years. Does this testimony conflict with that loyalty?" I held their gaze. "I am not testifying against General Caldwell. I am testifying for operational integrity. The failure was systemic. If we do not correct the system, another crew will face the same choice. And next time they may not survive it." The room was quiet for several seconds. Then one general spoke carefully. "Are you aware that General Caldwell's office requested your testimony be excluded due to alleged bias?" There it was. "I am aware now," I said evenly. "My testimony is based on documented evidence and 17 years of operational experience. If that is considered bias, I cannot control that." When it ended, I walked out unsure whether I had just protected my integrity or buried my future. 6 weeks passed. Then Tanaka called me in again. The committee released findings. I read the document slowly. Bureaucratic language. Measured tone. But buried in it was what mattered. Lieutenant Colonel Lawson demonstrated sound tactical judgment consistent with training and operational conditions. Her decision likely prevented loss of life and aircraft. Likely prevented loss of life. It wasn't a public apology. It wasn't a reversal of my transfer. But it was truth on record. Protocol revisions were mandated. Intelligence verification standards tightened. Field commanders granted expanded abort authority. Caldwell received counseling. Nothing that would derail a general's career. But enough to slow momentum. I expected to feel triumph. Instead, I felt tired. The vindication wasn't loud. It didn't erase the press briefing. It didn't restore my command. But it changed something deeper. I no longer doubted the decision in that cockpit. Weeks later, traveling home to Colorado, something unexpected happened at airport security. My dog tag, engraved with my operational call sign Iron Phoenix, triggered an internal security flag tied to my clearance credentials. The TSA supervisor's demeanor shifted instantly. They escorted me through. Respectful. Careful. It was a small moment. But it mattered. Because for months, I had felt erased. The system hadn't erased me. It remembered. But that wasn't the real victory. The real turning point was still coming. For months after the committee findings were released, people kept asking me if I felt vindicated. The honest answer was complicated. Yes, the record was corrected. Yes, the phrase, lapse in judgment, no longer stood unchallenged. Yes, the new protocols would protect future crews. But none of that put me back in the left seat of a C-17 at 30,000 feet. None of it restored the version of my career I had imagined. Vindication is quieter than revenge. It doesn't roar. It settles. Colonel Tanaka called me into his office again a week after the findings went public. The committee wants you on the implementation team, he said. You'll help rewrite the humanitarian rapid response doctrine. Joint Task Force level. Expanded clearance. He watched my face carefully. It won't be flying. But it will matter. I thought about the cockpit. The hum of engines. The ritual of checklists. The unspoken rhythm between pilot and crew. Then I thought about South Sudan. About how close we came. About how preventable that close call had been. I'm in, I said. The next 8 months were a different kind of deployment. No body armor. No flight suits. Just data, interviews, and long sessions with intelligence officers, logisticians, and field commanders who had their own near-miss stories. I pushed for layered intelligence verification. Mandatory dual-source confirmation before labeling a zone secure. Clear abort authority for aircraft commanders when ground conditions deteriorate in real time. Redundant encrypted communication channels to eliminate dead windows like the one at 1,318 hours. We built a framework that respected command hierarchy but restored tactical judgment to the field where seconds matter. The first time the revised protocols were tested was in a coastal evacuation in Southeast Asia after a cyclone. Intelligence was mixed. The timeline was compressed. Under the old rules, a crew might have pressed forward under pressure. Under the new rules, the aircraft commander paused, requested dual-source confirmation, identified a hostile convoy diverting toward the airstrip, and delayed landing by 11 minutes. That delay prevented a ground confrontation. The supplies still arrived. No one was injured. When I read that after-action report, I felt something steady in my chest. This was the kind of flying that saves lives quietly. Even if I wasn't in the cockpit, I was still part of it. Around that time, Tanaka made one more request. You need a mentee, he said. Someone sharp. Someone who hasn't learned patience yet. I almost laughed. That sounds familiar. He slid a file across his desk. Captain Lauren Mitchell. 30. Tactical airlift pilot. 3 commendations. 2 formal clashes with command over safety margins. Technically right. Politically clumsy. Lauren knocked on my office door on a cold January morning. She stood straight, eyes bright, jaw set. Ma'am, reporting as ordered. I motioned for her to sit. Tell me why you think you're here. She didn't hesitate. Because I was right and loud at the same time. I nodded. Being right is only half the equation. The other half is being effective. She frowned slightly. So I should play politics? No, I said. You should learn how to build a case so strong that politics can't ignore it. Over the next year, Lauren and I worked through a personnel recovery assessment. I taught her how to document everything. How to distinguish between emotion and evidence. How to escalate concerns through channels before detonating them in public. She taught me something too. She reminded me what it felt like to believe the system could be better, not just managed. When she asked me once, "Do you still hate him?" I knew she meant Caldwell. I thought about it carefully. No, I said. Hate keeps you tied to someone. I don't give him that space anymore. She studied me. Then what do you feel? I considered the question. Gratitude for what he taught me early on. Distance for what he chose later. 3 years after South Sudan, I was invited to speak at the National Defense University. 40 mid-career officers sat in a lecture hall, their uniforms pressed, their futures bright. I began with a question projected on a blank slide. What do you do when following orders might get people killed? The room went still. I walked them through South Sudan. The intelligence gap. The visual confirmation. The decision to abort. The press briefing. The hearing. The revised doctrine. I told them the truth. Being right isn't enough, I said. You need documentation. You need credibility. And you need courage. Build the first two before you're forced to use the third. A Navy lieutenant commander approached me afterward. Ma'am, I'm facing a cost-saving directive that erodes safety margins. Nothing dramatic. Just small compromises. Do I push back? I asked him 2 questions. Do you have documentation? And have you built enough credibility that they'll listen? He looked thoughtful. I'm building both. I nodded. Then pick your moment. Don't confuse urgency with effectiveness. Later that evening, I had dinner with my father in a small restaurant near the river. He was older now. Slower. Still stubborn. He had read about the oversight findings months ago and sent a one-line message, "Proud of you." That night he studied me across the table. You look lighter, he said. Like you put something down. I thought about the months of doubt after that press briefing. The nights replaying the runway in South Sudan. The feeling of being erased. I did, I said. I stopped trying to win the story. I focused on fixing the system. He nodded. Anger burns. Building lasts. There was one more moment that stayed with me. A year after the hearing, I was traveling through Denver International on my way back from a joint task force summit. At security, the metal detector beeped over my dog tag. The officer glanced at it. Iron Phoenix, he read. That a call sign? I held his gaze. Yes. He scanned it again. His expression shifted subtly as something registered in his system. He handed it back with quiet respect. Thank you for your service, Colonel. It wasn't about clearance flags or expedited lines. It was about recognition without spectacle. I walked toward my gate and realized I wasn't wearing the tag under my shirt anymore. It wasn't armor. It was history. Caldwell and I crossed paths once more at a joint symposium. He was still a general. Still composed. We exchanged professional greetings. No confrontation. No dramatic reckoning. Just two officers who had chosen different definitions of loyalty. As he moved on to greet someone else, I felt no surge of resentment. Only clarity. He had protected his narrative. I had protected my crew and, eventually, the doctrine that would guard others. Time had judged which mattered more. Today, I am not flying special operations missions. I am shaping how they are flown. I mentor officers who will sit where I once sat. I remind them that loyalty runs in multiple directions, and when it conflicts, integrity must anchor you. I tell them that silence can be strategic, but truth must never be optional. I tell them that sometimes the cockpit you lose becomes the platform you need. If you were in that cockpit over South Sudan, would you have followed the order or aborted the mission? If you've ever been blamed to protect someone more powerful, how did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments. I read them. I answer when I can. If this story resonated with you, hit like. Share it with someone navigating their own ethical crossroads. And subscribe for more stories about leadership under pressure, integrity under fire, and what it really means to rise. Because sometimes rising isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you're meant to be after the fire.